Zan, I want to start a conversation with you today. Maybe we start it and then leave it open for some comments and thoughts, and then we come back next week and tell everyone what we really think. Um, we have not had much of a conversation about taste
Taste.
in
Ah,
in in all of our years of the Amorati, and all the years of a kind of philosophical conversation about beauty. We haven't really explored taste that much. And if you love beauty, then clearly taste must follow. Uh, a
yeah,
way that a person is particularly touched or moved or excited by different forms of beauty. Um, and
yeah,
then taste can evolve, deepen, change as you get older or get exposed to new artifacts, people. Um, but then there is the difficult terrain of taste as flexing your status, or building a personality or an ego out of taste, right? And using taste as a tool of judgment. Um, let me just ask, what are some of your opening thoughts about the notion of taste? And
well,
where does
okay.
that word, which I don't know if it appeared in your book actually, um, where does that word fit into your framework or way of seeing things?
There's taste and a judgment thereof. Somebody's casting a judgment and say this is has taste, this is bad taste, right? It was, I think, Hume, the philosopher Hume, wrote a book, something about taste. He has a book about that in 1750 or something. Like that. And then, so he first was the first one to talk on the aesthetic level of the concept of taste, I think, and then Immanuel Kant in Critique of Pure Reason, I think he started to discourse on it. And taste is, and Roger Scruton picked that up. And Roger
Mm.
Scruton talked quite a bit about taste and discernment. And if you have a concept in your mind about, when you talk about art, for instance, of high art, Beethoven, Michelangelo, and stuff like that, and low art, Thomas Kincaid, the painter that did all the soft pastel cottages and stuff, and
Mm.
every living room in America has got these Thomas Kincaid, and on the calendars Thomas Kincaid paintings, right? and but there's no sadness in it. It's all euphoric and it's all bucolic, and there's no angst in it. There's no striving in it. And beauty, as we know, beauty is, as I know, as I understand, has an element of sadness threaded through it, or it isn't beauty. It's got that. It's got sorrow. Sorrow is a concept of beauty, and so something sentimental art, which Kundera called kitsch, which is what it is art that hasn't earned its place. It's just it's it's this is super interesting. It's art that hasn't learned its place, and it is just there. It doesn't inspire us. It doesn't inspire a sense of longing in us. And beauty we have a sense of longing. We long to be attributing ourselves and to aligning ourselves with beauty that we feel the deficit in our hearts. And great art makes us have that. When we see a cathedral and the majesty of it, we long to be caught up in the essence of it, the essence of it. So the question is, that was explored by these estheticians, that's not the right words, aesthetes, these aesthetes like Hume and Kant, who
Tricky
takes that
pronunciation.
and what is high art? For instance, what is the English canon in literature?
Mm.
Shakespeare, uh, Homer, Spencer. These are, Rudyard Kipling, who you mentioned earlier. These are part of the canon. Dickens, all the kind of stuff that we accept as being high art. Herman Melville and all this kind of stuff. Um, and then low art would be um, Tom Clancy or something, or like just churning out novels, right? But who makes that discernment? That's what's interesting. And the argument from Kant and Hume and Scruton is somebody's got to make that discernment. Someone's got to say this piece of music is beautiful enough and traditional enough and inspiring enough and beautiful enough to hand down to the generation coming. So we're going to package this and hand it down to them, the institutions, etc. That you're from
Mm.
Oxford. You're from Oxford. So somebody said this building, this church, this cathedral, this college has a taste that we're going to hand down to the next generation. And we're going to put artworks inside these colleges that have longevity and have that spirit. Okay. Somebody made that discernment, that judgment. And so somebody can say, well, Beethoven is much more inspiring and much more beautiful and much more as tasteful than Taylor Swift. But who's that judge?
Yeah.
If Taylor Swift music moves you to tears and you think and you get inspired or you feel some emotion, but that's what Kundera said is kitsch will just can give you emotion, but it gives you emotion backed by nothing, backed by no life affirmation movement. There's no movement. So it's interesting. Who makes that determination? I'm writing
Mm.
my book. Here's an interesting side piece for people. I'm writing my book, and you know what I listen to? I turn it on. The music I listen to when I'm writing this book, I'm trying to write these lofty ideas. Primus, Les Claypool. It's all bass, funk and weird music. Primus, man, go listen to Primus. Go listen to Les Claypool with Buckethead. Like to me, it's brilliant, and it's just this weird, quirky music of bass and wonky thing. I love it, and I sit there and I'm rocking in my chair and I'm thinking about my book and I'm listening to the music in the background.
Yeah.
And or other times for no reason, I'll put on I have a gospel playlist, and I've got Maranatha and the Heritage Singers, and it's all soft 1970s and 80s hymns. And I'll listen to that in the
Mm.
background as I'm working on my. So who's to say that the Heritage Singers or Maranatha Singers or Bill Gaither Trio is any more tasteful than Primus, or Primus is more tasteful? Who's to say? Who's to say that Primus? And guys, go look it up. If you haven't heard Primus, it's like, to me, Les Claypool is like a god because he plays the best bass in history, and I love bass, right? So who's to say that is more low art than Shostakovich or Chopin?
Okay, so we've been in this moment before. I remember you saying a few years ago on an episode that who's to say if it's better Wagner
Wagner,
or your local Romanian country music that everyone
right?
gathers around together and dances to, right? Because
Manele.
if if
Um,
Manele, yeah. So if one of them is capable of evoking frisson in you, then
wow.
it's doing the thing. But it sounds to me like this is where you diverged from someone like Roger Scruton, because I remember reading a very compelling chapter in one of his books where he took Tony Braxton and ripped us to shreds, Unbreak My Heart. Um, that this is low art,
Low art.
very, very, very degraded low art and bad taste.
Me.
So I think some of your philosophical predecessors have argued quite strongly, actually, that there is high taste and low taste, and there are things that are worth preserving and things that won't matter much if they're lost.
Yeah, that's what it is.
And
Is like,
you seem to be different in a sense here. If you're asking who judges that, you're making a I don't know, you're there's a subjectivity to judgment that's
I
important to
was
you,
in
rather than
lecture.
those who would say there is an objective kind of order of the canon. Shakespeare is at the top, and then beneath him, we could quite clearly rank them.
But I'm not a deconstructionist that thinks that traditions and the canon should be thrown out. I really do believe that they've been handed down to us for a reason. I'm 100% aligned with this conservative low C type of energy of this conserve things and hand them down to the generation. They have value and they have taste. At the same time, I make room in my psyche and my thought process for Primus and maybe Taylor Swift too. I haven't listened to her music very much, but um,
Maybe
because
Sir Roger had a secret guilty spot for Taylor
right,
Swift. Stranger
right,
things have happened.
exactly, and so um, yes, I'll say this because I spent time with Roger in his rooms with several people, and we are having a glass of whiskey with him in the late hours of the night. Not many people did this, but he had this discourse that he had in to the world that everybody listened to and applauds and values. And in the quiet evening winking hours, he would be like he get a little body in his jokes and stuff get a
Mm.
little politically incorrect. So yeah, everybody's got that side. And I was at a lecture in Oxford or Cambridge in Oxford about taste. The professor was talking about taste, and I'm in the audience, and he took questions. We were talking about classical music. I remember saying, I raised up my hand and I said, well, the classical musician or the classical composers in the late 1700s and the 1800s were the equivalent. If you were to size it up, and there's a theory about this, and it makes sense to me that they were the heavy metal art musicians of their time. It's metal. Wagner's metal. It's like if he had the tools and the type of instruments, it's the same kind of thing as like really strong metal. And they all poo-pooed me, of course, but I tried to say something interesting. But but um, but this is a fascinating thing because I do make like I'm wearing a t-shirt of The Big Lebowski,
Yeah.
which is a fantastic movie, and people say that's trite. It's inconsequential, and to me, I'm thinking no, it's we're trying to be so sacred in all of our choices and all of our persona to the world in public. And I've always espoused, and ours Amorata is the idea that we are sacred and we are profane, and out of the sacredness of my thinking came the Alabaster Girl, and out of the profanity of my thinking came the Alabaster Girl.
Mm.
Art has to have both. It has to be both. Otherwise, it's just saccharine, sentimental, and that's what Roger Scruton and these others were really railing against is the purposeless art. Just everybody has a painting of a duck on a pond on their wall. It means nothing. It gives you nothing. It gives you no sense of longing. Where Botticelli, would if you see it in Florence, right? So that's super interesting. I do diverge from Roger Scruton and these others to say that there is a place. There is a place for contemporary, or not contemporary, but more. I don't know. There has to be a place for that because it's meaningful to people.
Yeah, I
And
mean, I'm thinking of The Big Lebowski, which actually I watched it. I mean, I've been hearing for decades about the cult. A lot of my greatest friends have watched Big Lebowski 100 times, and they quote it endlessly, right? I
yeah,
watched it for the first time not long ago, and it's clearly one of these American kind of West Coast bunch of losers embroiled into some fantastical adventure type thing.
yeah.
There's been 100 of those movies, and they're all full of tropes. Something about The Big Lebowski, the way it's acted or pitched or written or something, it makes you feel like you want to belong to that time or place, or that you have a home somehow. It's The Big Lebowski is a refuge. There's a soulful quality of refuge that kind of transcends the film. And
Well, you're the
all the
film
other
expert
film,
in our group.
right, right. I mean, I'm watching this and I'm thinking, God, um, I know where I am here, but there's something so wonderful. It's like asking the question. does your favorite ramen belong on a list of fine dining?
Yeah.
Well,
Right.
when you
That's
when you're heartbroken, one of the guys in the movie course said this. When I'm heartbroken, there's a director that I go to, and I order my favorite ramen, and I sit inside, and it's raining outside, and I just, that's my soul food.
right. And the gourmands among us would say, "Well, you wasting your life. You're eating this ramen noodles," and that person absolutely would rather have his ramen noodles than your quail on spinach quiche
Yeah.
that you know. Even though one says this is more refined than the ramen noodles, um, and we 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 judge them as Philistines because you prefer ramen noodles. There's something wrong with your judgment, your taste. You're wrong. You are wrong. I'm judging you as wrong, right? Because and and the Big Lebowski, like the dude, is somebody we would all want to aspire to be the chill that he is. The dude abides. So this is interesting because I can't imagine. And is it snobbery? Because if I look at some of these academics that I know or I have known, um, are they just being snobs for the sake of being snobs and saying, that I don't think so. I think they really think that there's certain food, certain music, certain art, certain whatever. I'm against sentimental art and kitsch.
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
think it's a downfall of our society, and I'm against taking out the sacredness of sorrow and beauty from art, and the deconstructionists that just make a blob and it's called that art, and stick a chunky building in the middle of the London landscape that's jarring has a jarring effect. I'm with Scruton and these others on that, but this is interesting because I straddle both camps. I can't make a judgment against somebody who wants to read uh, trashy novels and they love their life.
Mm.
And well, that's not Moby Dick, like that's not Dostoevsky. And all, like if you go on Reddit and you look at the literature forum, I'm a member of the literature forum on the literature, whatever subreddit. People say, "What's your favorite book?" or "What's the best literature?" or whatever. All these different things. And what book do you think is timeless? And it's all the same ones repeated over and over and over and over again. Fitzgerald, Great Gatsby, you know, James Joyce. It's the same ones. There's nothing new. So the canon is kind of informal, and they repeat it. And I'm wondering if they really believe it, or if they only reading those things,
Mm.
or if they didn't read you know some kind of trashy novel and liked it a lot, and they never put in Harry Potter books in these lists of the elevated literature, even though Harry Potter has has been a boon and an inspiration and a life changing event for millions of people. And I've never read Harry Potter. I don't know. I've never seen. I've read
But
it myself.
Roger Scruton has a great video on damning Harry Potter and the infantilizing effect it has on modern day quote
Yes,
unquote
yeah, maybe
adults.
behind the theme there. Yeah, maybe I need to catch up on that and maybe I haven't considered it or read enough of it to recognize that my Big Lebowski taste is should be shunned. Maybe I need
Maybe if you really study the Big
to.
Lebowski, I think it, Scruton's problem with Harry Potter is that they've used personal magic, like personal manifestation, new age magic, to have all these wonderful quests, but the magic has taken the place of the sublime. And he talks about Hogwarts being full of rituals, but instead of actually any religious or sacred center to these rituals, they're empty rituals. And then
Yes.
the rituals, the kids go out and they do their magic, but the magic is a kind of personal
Yeah,
hero's journey. There's no communing around anything that has a greater meaning. So that's
it makes
basically
sense.
why he slams it in our particular age. But There's, I mean, one question I have for you, in your high-minded academic, philosophical, virtuous conversations around taste, what do people make of rock and roll or soul, American soul music?
They
What do they
um,
do with that?
they cast it out
Yeah.
with whole cloth. They just it's new, it's obscene, it's polluted the airwaves. That's that's the impression I get from these taste arbiters.
So
And
Nina Simone,
yeah, I don't know. I don't know. Like
right?
maybe yeah, Nina Simone or something very soulful or something. Maybe they say, okay, well that's okay. I don't know, but 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 I don't. I just can't uh, abide. The dude has to abide. You know, I can't consider these things. You talked about the sublime, and I have a quarrel with these aesthetes, these philosophical, and who am I? They're lofty um, philosophers who wrote and considered and changed the discourse of human thought. But I have a quarrel with Edmund Burke and Immanuel Kant when they talk about the concept of the sublime. They took the concept of the sublime and changed it into what they wanted it to be, in my mind. And they say
Mm.
that beauty is sublime is a quality of beauty, but it is the terrifying. So an ocean at sea and the storm at sea and the vastness of the universe terrifies us to a degree, and they called that the sublime. And I think that's wrong. They changed the definition of sublime in the late 1700s, and I think it's a stupid change from Kant and I'm trying to restore it. It's a
Good,
sublime
good
to me.
rebuttal.
The sublime to me is beauty in beauty laced with the sacred, something that makes you still and calm. Like you walk into the Blue Mosque in Istanbul, and I'm not a Muslim, but you can feel the reverence and the tonality of the place has a different thing than if you walked into a Walmart the same size. And same with like the Notre Dame Cathedral or Westminster Abbey. You walk in these places and they have a storied effect on you and a hushing, they hush your soul and make you realize your place in the history of the cosmos and how small and insignificant you are compared to walking into a warehouse of the same
Yeah.
size mentioned. So that to me is a sublime. Sublime is not terrifying. And I go on record as saying I'm against Burke and Kant and even Roger Scruton, repeated that because I think the sublime is something that elevates your to a sense of contemplation and longing. That art is art if it has a touch of the sublime in it. My definition of sublime. I've changed
So
it. I'm taking you back to
I
what it
think,
was. Go ahead.
I think in the classic philosophy of aesthetics, most high-minded teachers, writers, thinkers would say a similar thing. You walk into some of these great cathedrals of the world, mosques, synagogues, etc., and you feel impacted. There's a spiritual reverence. There is this ascending quality of going up to something and something coming down to you,
Yeah.
and all the bliss and all the spiritual and philosophical virtues that one is touched by in a moment like that. Sacred moment, heavens open. Um, I I believe one idea that's been really fascinating for me is the idea that there are two different spiritual paths or directions. And one of them is going up towards heavenly virtues, which is the history of great architecture, um, basically every organized monotheistic religion. Um, it's a very masculine way of I'm going to ascend into
Yes.
something transcendental and beyond.
Half the
But there
church is
is,
higher because to pull you up,
yeah.
right?
So and just the whole metaphor that heaven is up.
The metaphor of heaven is up. Yeah.
And then there is another spiritual path, which is to go down, or the metaphor that you can go down into something that is rather than light and upwards, down into something that is dark and mysterious, and it goes into the fibers in the cells of the body and into the roots of the earth and into the realm of soul. So you're in the clay and the mud and the oceans and the volcanoes and the insects and all this kind of stuff. So this is the feminine direction of embodiment and soul and grassroots. Your Romanian country music, the what comes out of the the ukulele, wherever you did soul music, anything that comes soul. I would say the Big Lebowski comes out of the soul and out of the earth. So
Out of the earth.
you don't watch the Big Lebowski and have a um uh, Westminster Abbey moment, but you have a different kind of moment of like you settle down, you stick on the DVD or the Blu-ray or whatever. Again, the ramen comes at the door. You're there with a couple of buddies, and you get out a beer, and you go back to the bowling alley, and you feel like you belong in the earth itself. So, and like you want to belong.
It's not didactic. It's not. It doesn't set out to teach you something. The Big Lebowski has no lesson in it. There's no. It's like Seinfeld. There was no. One of the rules they had was there's no hugging, no redemption. All the characters are flawed, and there is no redemption in any of it throughout the whole thing. And it hit a nerve
Yeah.
because that's right. So
But
this is
but how many people wanted to remake The Big Lebowski in their own way, in their own hometown and with their own kind of friends or country or whatever, and failed miserably to get that kind of vibe that people want to watch this again and again and somehow but like just abide in that world that they created.
further
Why the
extension of it.
failure?
The further extension is Napoleon Dynamite, the movie Napoleon Dynamite, which was a
Yeah,
sensation back in the day, and it was even
yeah,
more absurd and more leaning into inconsequential and trivia and nothing happening. And I loved it. I've seen Napoleon Dynamite 3 or 4 times. I showed it to
yeah,
Deanna and Claudia just recently. As you got to watch this movie, and if you get it, you get it. You have to have this primus mentality that's part of your psyche in some place, and at the same time, I like if you look at my books. I mean, I'm reading. I'm reading. We're going to pull out Transfiguration of the Commonplace by Dante, a famous book on modern art. I'm reading. You know, I'm reading. Just grabbing Vladimir Nabokov in context.
hmm,
This here's my Milan Kundera. You know, and at the same time, I like Napoleon Dynamite. And who's to say? And maybe it's because I came from the earth myself. I came from the wilderness, and I didn't. My early development years were not steeped in culture. I was devoid of culture as a child. I should say that's interesting. I should explore that because I was not exposed to culture in any way. When I was a kid, we were poor, and the only books I had to read was my mom had bought the World Book encyclopedias, and I read those encyclopedias basically all through my childhood. I would take the book M, and I would just go through it and read everything. I read encyclopedias as a kid. That's all the books I had. And then my mom had Reader's Digest, which is the sentimental kitsch you could possibly imagine, like little jokes and little anecdotes and little inconsequential stories. And I devoured those. And then when I was 12, 11, 12, maybe 13, I started reading Louis L'Amour, which I have one of his here. And this kind of stuff. Look, Flashman. It's like
let's have a look at that. Oh my word.
Flashman. There's a whole series on this guy. Flashman Papers. Coward, scoundrel, lover, and cheat. Join Flashman on his adventures as he survives fearful ordeals and outlandish perils across the four corners of the world. Can a man be all bad? So, and I read Louis L'Amour Western novels that he pumped out these novels, and I loved him as a kid. So my culture was pulp. Pulp
Yeah.
Fiction was my culture. And I still have Flashman novel.
I mean, forget Casanova. This guy is the founding figure of the Amorati by the looks of it.
It's the greatest thing, man. And there's a whole
Yeah,
series of novels. I have another one for you. Let's see
my
here.
word.
So, and so I'm reading these types of things, And what else I got here? Yeah, and here's another one that I have. The Invention of Philosophy in English. Thick book.
Yeah.
So, and they sit on my bookshelf side by side. So I came out of the wilderness and the forest, and I only had my only culture was Louis L'Amour novels, Tarzan. I was given the book Return of Tarzan by Edgar Rice Burroughs when I was 7 or 8. I was mesmerized. I devoured. I loved to this day. Tarzan is something. So I'm very lowbrow in my culture, in my development, and maybe that's why I'm still lowbrow now. But I'm also highbrow. Like I really value the canon and the conservative viewpoint. I'm not a deconstructionist. I'm not postmodern. I don't believe that things should be torn down, traditions. Um, I straddle both camps and I get both camps. That's weird. I never thought about this before.
Yeah.
That's weird.
Well, I mean, I think there's plenty of history of people from very erudite upbringings who would sneak out of a concert and then slum it in the local bar. Have a knees up in the Cockney bar with a piano, or they'd break into some jazz club,
Right.
100 years ago because they wanted
It
to
was,
be in it with the people. They felt a vitality that was missing in the aesthetically kind of ascending
yeah.
thing that they were trained to do, as a concert pianist or whatever. At this point, I want to throw in a dating style question. Why not? Um, about taste. So, I mean, in the Ars Amorata program, right? I mean, since you've been publicly teaching and speaking about relationships and attraction and all this kind of stuff, um, I think it's fair to say you've put an attention on your taste of clothing and your style and the way that you present yourself.
Of
Like
course.
you're not showing up in the bog standard H&M Zara suit, just to
Yeah. Yeah.
pass get through the meeting, right? You put a real intentionality on the things that you choose to wear.
Correct. That's
But
true. Yeah.
at no real point in your message or your teaching do you say actually taste in clothes or taste in style is important. Not
Yeah.
that
That's
I
interesting.
remember. And I'm curious why that is, because
That's interesting.
um, you ask some men and a lot of women of the world, they will say, actually, I'm attracted to a man with taste. He signals his character through his deliberate taste, um, his refinement, his capability in life. I can tell a lot about a man by his clothes, and you can't tell a lot about a man who is, head to toe Uniqlo and jogging bottoms and so
Well,
on.
you can't tell a lot.
Without any thought, or yeah, you,
Yeah.
you can
You
tell
tell
a
a lot
lot.
about.
You can tell he doesn't pay attention.
I really do, and I've never really talked about it, I suppose, or espoused my views on it. But I absolutely think that the presentation of you, like Robert Greene said it, to poeticize your presence.
Hmm.
And I think the conscious choice and effort to try and create something intriguing about you, something mystique laden, so that when people meet you, there's something. And I'm very much a proponent of that. Um, e- Everything is conscious, I think. So, but I've never really talked about it. But I do believe that men are neglecting that and just not thinking it's important. It's like women saying, "Oh, my personality should be enough. You shouldn't be attracted to my looks if you can't get my personality." But men are visually driven. So this
Hmm.
is I should talk about a discourse on it, um, because
Yeah, and
I haven't really, but it's very important. And hygiene, I mentioned that before, but hygiene, your extremities is what women look at when they first meet you. They don't know they're doing it. If you mention to them, they go, "Really? Do I do that?" But in general, women look at your extremities, your hair or lack thereof, your nails, and your shoes. They scope you out in zero point zero 0.01 of a second. And if your shoes are not worthy, and I don't mean like $500 trainers, I mean like well intentioned, chosen shoes that represent your personality, and your nails are not trim and clean and nurtured, and your hair or lack thereof is not considered. It's just whatever, like me today. um, Women notice that. Women take that in a second, and they judge you immediately on your character, your potential, your the future you 30 years from now. And your shoes are important. Never, I always tell guys, there's two things you should never scrimp on when it comes to money, no matter how broke you are, and that's wine and shoes. And I don't mean you need to have expensive shoes. You have to have shoes that really match the personality and the tone of you. Because women judge you by your shoes; they don't know they're doing it, and by your
Mm.
extremities, your fingers.
It's it's interesting that you say shoes that match the tone and personality of you. It's not like just show up in a very expensive shoe shop and buy what is the
No,
icon in the store. It's that you intentionally choose something somehow.
yeah, exactly. And as again, as an as someone who I cannot step into the arbiter of taste role, which a lot of people do, a lot of snobbery, a lot of
Yeah,
people. Yep. And for me to say, well, you're wearing these hiking boots, and that's wrong, and women are going to judge you. But it might be his persona is this hiking, nature loving, and that is aligned with him. And who am I to judge that? But
yeah.
it has to be tasteful. And we talked at the beginning of this conversation was taste, and who's the judgment of taste. If it's just sloppily thrown together and matter of fact, and you don't really consider it, and you walk around Bucharest here, any city, and the guys are all wearing the same exact thing. Uh, it's summer here, so they're wearing knee-length shorts and a t-shirt. That's it. And who am I to judge that, right? Because they're comfortable. Like I could go on. You look at 1930s, 1940s, the men wore suits and vests and a hat. Even if they're, I remember like going to some English gentleman's home, knocking on the door randomly, and a friend, and he said, "Let's go to see my father," and he's wearing a tie in his home, watching, sitting with his newspaper. He didn't know his visitors were
Mm.
coming, but he was wearing a tie anyway. And you think, why do we not do that anymore? And it's decried. Why are we wearing all this, tracksuits and stuff like that? And there's a very good reason. We judge it, but there's a very good reason. Tracksuits and trainers are light, robust. They don't stain. They're easy to breathe in compared to heavy wool sweaters and stuff like that. And there's a reason that they become so athletic wear has become the standard wear because it's really comfortable and it's really durable and it's really inexpensive. So the people from 300 years ago, if they had tracksuits, they'd be wearing them. You know, so I remember building log cabins when I was a kid. I was helping build log cabins, and we're chopping out the grooves to roll the log onto the thing. I built several log cabins. I helped build log cabins, and we're using a chainsaw to go and then chopping it out with an adze or an axe, clean it out and then smooth it out, sort of thing. And I remember asking the old guy, hey, we're wilderness people. 100 years ago, people never used the chainsaw. He goes, yeah, but if the pioneers had a chainsaw, they would have damn well used it. They would have loved to have a chainsaw. We're saying, oh, they were all pure because they didn't need all this fancy chainsaw stuff. They would have used it. Are you kidding me? So
Yeah.
we got snobbery mentality. Anyway,
You, I mean, you've long said that people like to cherry pick their favorite elements from your message. So a lot of men I like authenticity. I like vulnerability. I want to be more authentic. I want to be more vulnerable. Um, but then there are some themes which are more testing, the darker sexual masculinity,
yeah,
polarizing themes. And I think taste is one of those where it's like your level of taste or your unexplored. relationship with your own taste, um, offers a kind of benchmark or a test, whereas your authenticity is like everyone is welcome, everything is well. There's no metric. It's
Yeah.
everyone is welcome and accepted. But when it comes to things like taste, all of a sudden you find yourself on, where do I rank in this room in terms of being well dressed or stylish or standing out? Am I in the upper echelon? Okay, that feels good. God, I'm in the lower echelon again, and therefore I can never find clothes that fit. I don't know what I'm doing with clothes. I walk and I'm overwhelmed. Everything seems either expensive. When I put on something that other people seem to think is cool, it doesn't fit my body shape. There are so many options. I don't get it. I must therefore be, and people can fall into this worthlessness cycle, shame cycle. I'm not going to go anywhere beautiful because it's full of beautiful people who are well dressed, and I don't feel like I can pull off my version
Sure.
of what that would be without a substantial exploration of style. So how I think this is coming to where the cliffhanger of the episode will have to lie. But
Mm.
how? I mean, one of the questions is how much taste. And we've had in our Amorati conferences some incredibly well-dressed men that come up, and they have an aura that fills up the room. Good pair of shoes, good trousers, and waistcoat, and all the rest of it. Like beautiful man standing. But we've also had one or two that showed up in jogging bottoms,
Yeah.
and our illustrious friend with the plastic bag full of his lunch that he brought from the local supermarket, and Serene had to tell him off. He was very well dressed, by the way. It was just the shopping bag, that was ruffles and sensitivities. That there are a couple of people that don't engage with this. So it's like, how much taste do you need in order to represent well in the land of women? And two, how much cultivation of one's taste and style ought one do? And is that
Mm.
going to be, can that be pleasurable for everybody? Can that be an invitational, expressive, beautiful thing that we do? I'm going to learn how to dress. Or is it like an imposition where I'm constantly like, spending thousands of dollars, but, you know, always looking in the mirror and not liking what I look back at?
This is
Because
interesting.
I've chucked a lot of stuff at you here, but I think
You did
there's a
this thing.
segment of there's a segment of Amorati who are well-meaning and love our message and want a greater impact in their social ambience, but they are the taste style conversation is something that has not taken root
We need to move
for
in
them.
that direction. We need to have this conversation and start to expound on this because there's something about it that is basal, something about it's foundational.
Hmm.
We're talking about this is interesting, and we've never really talked about it too much, But we need to start exploring that the aesthetic side of life. This is interesting. This is my favorite podcast because it's just like, yeah. I know we're out of time, but this is interesting.
And
Consciousness.
obviously that I mean we do have a few members who are so well versed in the aesthetic side of life that actually that becomes a limiting factor. The
Exactly.
discernment, i.e., judgment, is so strong that no woman or no one matches up to their ideals
And they
of
can't
what
get a girl.
their aesthetic experience should be. Yeah, exactly. And then we have the, let's say, the underside on that, which is, God, I'm just so overwhelmed and intimidated by this conversation about
And they
taste.
can't
I
get a
don't.
girl.
Yeah, I can't access that in a way that feels good to me either, right? So,
Both spectrum can't get end of the spectrum can't get a girl. The elitist, the one who's saying that women are not my perfect body, my perfect aesthetic quality, they're lonely and alone. And the ones that are the slobby and not taking care and have consideration of their appearance and the way they show up in the world, poeticizing the presence, they can't get a girl and they're lonely in the world. That's funny.
so there's a dude level abiding in the middle.
The dude abides,
Try and
man.
not tried. Yeah.
Dude abides.
Um. We'll take this further next time out. So at this
Okay.
point, I'll invite I'll invite from the viewers and listeners your experiences, reflections, both on taste. By the way, I wanted to throw out a few years ago, I put out in Facebook a question in our Amorati group. What song do you think best represents this message for you? I was really curious about how people
Mhm.
interpreted what we're doing with the music. And I know we've got some musicians in our group and some people very well schooled in music, but we also had some dodgy picks. You know, if I'm now the judgment of taste, which clearly looking through everyone's favorite song that they think represents the message, I couldn't help but be very discerning and judgmental. That people's views and tastes of like what sounds accompany this aspiration or what they feel inside as a lover, or if your sexual energy were a song, what would it be? There's some interesting selections I've heard over the years from the men we work with. So yeah, I'd love to hear where you stand on this whole question, and we'll look at some of the responses and take it further next time out.
Okay. Perfect. Okay.